We find ourselves in this rather awkward situation. We say we don't serve money, and yet we've developed this whole system for doing church that is absolutely reliant on money. We've given up Christianity for churchianity. And in the process, we've begun kneeling at the altar of money instead of kneeling before the empty tomb. That's an unpleasant and not too popular thing to say, but sometimes a clear-eyed look in the mirror reveals things that are uncomfortable. And those are the very things we need to deal with if we're going to grow in our Christian maturity and our godliness and our holiness. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. Jesus said we can't serve God and money. So why do so many churches try to do just that? Perhaps just importantly, do we even realize we're doing that? Or could it be that we've trodden so far down the path that we've lost sight of who we are and what we're really supposed to be doing? I'm convinced we've gone from Christianity to churchianity and now find ourselves trying to serve two masters without ever realizing it. We need to wake up and get off this dangerous path before it's too late. You've clearly heard the word Christianity before, but you may or may not have heard the word churchianity. And you may be inclined to say it's not a real word, but it turns out that it is a word. It's actually listed in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And the definition is this: a usually excessive or narrowly sectarian attachment to the practices and interests of a particular church. That sounds like a fine definition, but I think it maybe glosses over the critical issue. And that critical issue is that someone's deepest allegiance is often on defending and promoting their preferred brand of church to the point that it outweighs their defense and promotion of our Savior, Jesus, the Christ. The shorter way to say this is that church has become an idol, something that we actually prioritize above God and Jesus. Thus, we've turned from Christianity to churchianity. If you spend any time on YouTube, you'll find all kinds of videos telling you why a particular brand of church is the right brand of church and all the others are wrong, or at a minimum not as good as the kind of church they're promoting. Catholics promote Catholicism. Protestants promote Protestantism. Baptists tell you should be a Baptist. Methodists tell you should be a Methodist, etc., etc., etc. On and on it goes. Everyone promoting their particular brand of church, churchianity, promoting a particular brand of church far more passionately than promoting Jesus. We've replaced Christianity with churchianity. That's nothing short of idolatry, and it's wrong. This shows up in a variety of ways, but today I want us to focus on one related to something that Jesus spoke clearly about. Jesus had a number of things to say about divided loyalties. In Matthew 6:24, he said, "No one can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." He's giving us a very clear warning here. He's telling us that God and money are going to compete for our loyalty, and we have to make a choice. I would dare say that most of us are familiar with that verse. And I would also say that if we were completely honest about it, we struggle with this, particularly here in the U.S. or other highly developed nations where everything in life seems to hinge on money. And sadly, our churches are not immune from this. As a matter of fact, we've set a trap for ourselves. We've formalized and institutionalized our churches to the point that money becomes the single biggest factor in practically everything we do. Now, the tendency is to point our finger at some of those charlatan, heretical prosperity preachers that live in mansions, wear designer clothes, and fly around in their private planes. But let's not get distracted by them. Let's focus on ourselves. Let's take an honest look in the mirror at ourselves instead of looking down our noses at a few obvious heretics. Not only have we made an idol out of our brand of church, we've also turned these brands into institutions that are shackled, bound, slaves to money. Think about your average church and the financial burden it has. Have to pay the preacher and any other paid staff like a church secretary, accountant, youth minister, etc. Most churches have a mortgage they have to pay for their building, often taking up a significant portion of the budget. On top of that, there's all the maintenance and upkeep of the building, and if your mortgage is old enough to not be very big, then the upkeep cost is probably pretty high. Let's face it, that building that gets used a few hours a week costs a lot of money. Then there's the utilities to heat and cool the place, the electricity bill to use the lights, and all the other equipment. There's the janitorial service and the lawn service and the audio system, microphone, speakers, etc. And these days, almost everyone has video projection capability of some sort. Like it or not, the building takes a lot of money. We've built this system that is basically a slave to money. The system is beholden to a costly place to meet and paid staff to make things happen. The typical church in the United States uses 75% of its budget on salaries and buildings. What about the other 25% of the budget, though? Well, the data shows that a majority of the 25% is spent on various and sundry other internal expenses. Buying supplies for classrooms, funding or at least subsidizing the food costs for fellowship meals, senior adult game nights, youth parties, decorations for bridal showers or baby showers, kitchen supplies for the Family Life Center, coffee makers, etc., etc., etc. There's practically no end to the things we spend our money on for ourselves. Try having some sort of church event or activity and tell people they'll need to contribute to fund it. Tell them the church isn't going to use church treasury funds for these kinds of events anymore. Then stand back and watch the explosion. Put your armor on to prepare for the onslaught of complaints and griping and whining that will surely ensue. Most churches spend upwards of 85% or more of their budget internally, paying for salaries, buildings, and other internal activities. We spend more than 4 out of every $5 on ourselves. And any notion that the church is going to cut back on any of these expenditures will not go over very well. We have created this whole system that's completely reliant on the almighty dollar. Jesus says in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." It may be uncomfortable to ask, but what does that say about our hearts when we spend 85% of our contributions to the church on ourselves? A nice, comfortable building to sit in a couple hours a week, a paid preacher to conduct a sermon or two in a Bible class, and all the other odds and ends that we find to spend more money on ourselves. So when Jesus says it's more blessed to give than receive, how is this system we've built that spends multiple times more on ourselves than on others doing in that regard? Does the giving really count when we're actually giving to ourselves? When Jesus says he didn't come to be served, but to serve, how is this system we've built that spends multiple times more on ourselves than on others doing in that regard? Are we focused on serving others, or is this system built to actually serve ourselves? Is it possible that our effort to promote our particular brand of church, that churchianity we described earlier, has led us to build this formalized, institutionalized, money-anchored system that has become a slave to money, that has anchored itself to the dollar so heavily that we're actually kneeling at the altar of money without even realizing it. So we find ourselves at this very awkward place, teaching in our churches that we can't serve both God and money, but finding ourselves inside of a system that's a slave to money. When we find ourselves doing church in a way that's counter to what the Bible has to say, maybe it's time to start thinking about doing church in a different way. Listen, I'm sure there are a variety of reactions to what we've talked about today, but I'm convinced we need to do some serious self-examination. And hopefully today's thoughts will encourage you to do a bit of that. Thanks for listening. God bless you on your journey.